When my parents passed away, I thought grief would be the hardest thing I'd ever have to face. I was wrong. The real pain came later, slowly, quietly, like a shadow stretching across the years. It wasn't the loss of my mother and father that hollowed me out. It was what my brother did after they were gone. Before I tell you how it happened, tell me, from where are you watching? I'd love to hear how far these stories reach, how far the echoes of broken families travel. My name's Daniel, and for most of my life I believed blood was sacred. My brother Michael and I were just 2 years apart. We grew up in a modest home outside of Boston, one of those neighborhoods where everyone knew everyone, and our parents were the kind of people you'd trust with anything. My father ran a small hardware store, and my mother taught music at the local elementary school. We didn't have much, but we had a sense of decency and trust that I thought nothing could touch. Michael was always the golden one, sharp, charming, and ambitious. I was quieter, more reserved, more like my mother. He went into finance while I became a teacher, following in her footsteps. Our parents were proud of us both, or at least that's what I thought. When they passed, first Mum, then Dad just 8 months later, the house fell silent in a way I'd never experienced before. The world seemed to move on too quickly. We buried them side by side on a grey morning in March, the kind where even the air feels tired. Michael stood beside me at the graveside, sunglasses on, his jaw clenched. I remember thinking that maybe grief just looked different on him. But grief wasn't what he was hiding. A few weeks after the funeral, we met with our father's lawyer to go over the will. I didn't expect much. Maybe the house would be sold, and we'd split what was left. That's how families usually do it, right? But the lawyer's face had that careful neutrality people use when they're about to ruin your world. He read through the document slowly, clearly, word by word. Everything, everything had been left to my brother. The house, the store, the savings, the life insurance. My name wasn't mentioned once. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. My father was meticulous, the kind of man who still balanced his checkbook by hand. There was no way he'd intentionally cut me out. But when the lawyer confirmed that the will had been updated just 6 months before Dad's death, the air left the room. Michael didn't even flinch. He sat there, hands folded, expression unreadable. When I turned to him, waiting, hoping for some kind of explanation, he just said quietly, "Dad wanted it this way." I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "You think I'm going to believe that?" He looked at me with something close to pity. "Daniel, you've always been different. You were never good with money. Dad worried about that." That line. You were never good with money. It rang in my ears for years afterward. I didn't even argue. What could I say? My brother had the papers, the lawyer, the authority, and I had nothing but disbelief. I left that office numb. I didn't fight the will. I didn't contest it. Some part of me refused to believe it was real, that my father would do that to me. Instead, I withdrew, sold my small apartment, moved to a quieter town, started teaching at a local high school where no one knew my last name. Life became small, simple, and quiet. But the wound never healed. Every time I looked at a family photo, every time I visited my parents' graves, I wondered what I had done to deserve being erased from their legacy. Michael took over the family business, turned it into something big. Within a few years, he was running multiple stores, investing, expanding. I'd see his name in the local paper, sometimes on billboards even. M. Grant and Sons Hardware, built on family. The irony cut deep. Years passed, 15 to be exact. I didn't speak to him once. There were times I thought about reaching out, maybe to ask for an explanation, maybe just to say that I still existed. But every time I picked up the phone, something stopped me. Pride, pain, maybe both. Then one morning I got a call from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. "Mr. Grant, this is from the office of M. Grant and Sons. Your brother Michael has passed away." I didn't speak. My heart didn't know what to do with that information. I didn't cry. I didn't even breathe for a few seconds. The man continued. "He requested that you be informed personally. There's also a letter he left for you. You can collect it from his attorney." A letter. After 15 years of silence, my brother had found his voice again. I took the next train back to Boston. The city felt smaller than I remembered, the streets narrower, the people moving faster. When I stepped into the lawyer's office, déjà vu hit me like a punch. The same oak furniture, the same solemn air, but this time it was my brother's death being discussed, not my father's. The lawyer handed me an envelope, cream-colored and sealed with red wax. My name was written on the front in Michael's sharp handwriting. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. The first line hit me like ice. "If you're reading this, Daniel, it means I'm gone. There's something you need to know about our parents' will and about me." I froze. My hands trembled slightly as I kept reading. I didn't earn what they left me, I took it. That single sentence pulled the floor out from under me. Michael wrote about how he'd manipulated Dad in his final months, subtly, carefully, convincing him I was irresponsible, unfit to handle the inheritance. He'd used my quietness, my trust, and my distance against me. Said I had gambling debts, said I'd made poor investments. Lies, every word of it. He said he'd done it not for greed, but out of resentment. He had always believed our parents loved me more. He wanted to prove himself the better son, the one who could build something lasting. He wrote, "It worked. Dad changed the will, and I built an empire from the money that should have been yours. But I lost everything else. My peace, my family, my sleep. I kept waiting for you to call. I thought one day you'd show up, scream at me, make it even. You never did. And somehow that made it worse." I stopped reading. My eyes were burning, my chest tight. All the years of confusion, anger, and emptiness crystallized into something I hadn't felt in a long time: clarity. There were more pages, more apologies, but one line near the end stayed etched in my mind. "The business, the house, the accounts, they're yours now. But I know that's not what you came for. I know it's too late." He was right, it was too late. That night, I walked through the city until the lights blurred and the air turned cold. I ended up outside the old hardware store, the first one our father had built with his own hands. The sign still said M. Grant and Sons, though the paint was faded. I stood there for a long time, watching my reflection in the glass. For 15 years I had carried the weight of betrayal. But standing there I realized something quietly devastating. I wasn't the only one who had suffered. My brother had too. And though I didn't know it yet, the truth that letter revealed wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of what I was about to uncover. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the small guest house I'd rented near downtown Boston, reading and rereading my brother's letter until the words blurred. Every sentence felt like a confession whispered through time, every word balancing between remorse and justification. When dawn finally broke, I folded the letter and slipped it into my jacket pocket. I didn't know why, but I needed to see the old house again, the one we grew up in. Maybe I thought standing there would make things make sense, or maybe I was chasing a memory that didn't exist anymore. When I reached the neighborhood, it looked smaller, like time had quietly folded it in on itself. The maple tree in front of our old yard was still there, though its trunk was thicker and its branches heavier. The white fence my father used to repaint every summer was gone, replaced by an iron gate. Someone else lived there now. I could hear children laughing faintly from the backyard. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time before the front door opened. A woman stepped out, holding a cup of coffee, her expression wary but kind. "Can I help you?" she asked. I smiled faintly. "No, I just grew up here, long time ago." She smiled back. "Beautiful house, isn't it? You can tell it was built with love." I nodded, unable to speak. Love, that word hit harder than I expected. My father had built that home with love, but somehow we'd managed to turn that love into something twisted. Competition, jealousy, resentment. I thanked her quietly and walked away. From there, I went to the hardware store, the one my brother had transformed into a chain. The flagship location was unrecognizable. Modern glass front, digital signage, polished steel everywhere. Inside, everything gleamed. It was impressive, efficient, and cold. An older man at the counter looked up as I entered. His name tag said Eddie. "Can I help you, sir?" "I used to know the man who owned this place," I said quietly. "Ah," he smiled. "You must mean Mr. Grant. Good man, tough but fair. He kept this place running like a clock." I hesitated. "Did he ever talk about family?" Eddie tilted his head, thinking. "Not much, but sometimes after hours. He'd sit at that old counter, the one in the back, and stare at the wall for what felt like hours. I asked him once what he was thinking about. He said, 'My brother.' Then he'd go quiet." My throat tightened. I nodded a faint thanks and turned to leave. Outside, the city felt heavier. The letter in my jacket pocket suddenly seemed like a burden I wasn't sure I wanted to carry. My brother had done something unforgivable, but he had also spent years trapped in his own punishment. That night, I went back to the guest house and poured myself a glass of whiskey. I sat by the window, the letter beside me, and thought about everything we'd lost. When you lose family, it's like losing your reflection. You keep searching for yourself in other people's faces, hoping to find what was taken. But when betrayal comes from blood, it cuts deeper. It changes how you see yourself, how you trust, how you remember. 15 years. 15 years of silence, anger, and wondering. And now, in a few paragraphs, everything I thought I knew had turned upside down. There was a note at the end of Michael's letter, one I hadn't noticed before, written in smaller handwriting. If you want the truth, all of it, talk to David. He still works at the old office. David was our father's old accountant. He had handled the store's books long before Michael expanded it. I hadn't thought about him in years. The next morning I drove to his office, an old brick building downtown with a weathered sign that read Harris and Company. When I walked in, a grey-haired man looked up from behind his desk. His eyes widened slightly. "Daniel?" he said, almost whispering. "Good God, it's been years." We shook hands, and after a few moments of small talk, I told him why I was there. He sighed deeply, leaned back in his chair, and rubbed his temples. "I always wondered if you'd ever find out," he said quietly. "Find out what?" "That the will wasn't just changed, it was rewritten under pressure. Your father didn't want to do it, Daniel. He told me himself." My heart stopped. "Then why did he?" David hesitated. "Because Michael showed him something that scared him." I frowned. What could he possibly have? He cut me off with a heavy breath. "Your mother was sick before she died, right? She had those episodes, confusion, memory lapses." I nodded slowly. "Yes, we thought it was just exhaustion. The doctors said early dementia." David leaned forward. "It wasn't. It was medication interference. Someone had been giving her the wrong dosage. Too strong. It made her worse." My blood ran cold. "You're saying—" He nodded grimly. "Your father found out, Daniel, and he thought you were the one responsible. Michael told him you were managing her pills, that you'd mixed them up. He even showed him a prescription bottle with your handwriting on it." I stared at him in disbelief. "That's impossible. I never touched her medication." "I know," David said softly, "but your father didn't. He was devastated. He thought you'd been careless. That guilt killed him faster than the illness ever could." I couldn't breathe. My legs felt weak, and I sank into the chair across from him. All these years, I'd believed my father disowned me for being irresponsible with money, but the truth was far crueler. He'd thought I'd hurt my mother, and my brother had made sure of it. David sighed, his voice trembling. "Your brother came to me years later after the funeral. He was drunk, crying. Said he'd forged your handwriting on the label, said he'd switched the bottles himself. He wanted to make your father angry enough to cut you off, to make sure you couldn't ruin what he thought was his future. But by the time he realized what he'd done, it was too late." Silence filled the room. Only the ticking of a small wall clock broke it. I sat there, staring at nothing, the weight of what I'd just heard pressing down like a physical force. My brother hadn't just stolen my inheritance. He'd stolen my father's faith in me. He'd turned love into suspicion, memory into poison. When I finally spoke, my voice came out hollow. "He destroyed everything. For what? Money?" David shook his head. "For approval. For something he thought he'd never had." I stood slowly, my hands trembling. I didn't know whether to scream or collapse. Every memory of my brother, every laugh, every shared secret, twisted in my mind like shards of glass. Before I left, David said something that stuck with me. "He paid for it, Daniel. Maybe not the way you wanted, but he did. You were free. He wasn't. He lived in the prison he built." When I stepped outside, the sunlight felt wrong, too bright, too clean. The city around me moved like nothing had changed. But inside me, everything had. For 15 years, I'd blamed myself. For 15 years, I'd mourned a father who died disappointed in me. Now, I knew that disappointment had been built on lies, lies my own brother had crafted. That night, I drove to the cemetery where my parents were buried. The grass was damp, the air heavy with the scent of rain. I stood between their graves, the letter still in my pocket. "I didn't do it," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Dad, I didn't do it." The wind rustled through the trees, soft, almost like a sigh. And for the first time in 15 years, I let myself cry, not out of grief, but release. Still deep down, I knew there was one more truth waiting. Something in Michael's letter hinted at it. A final piece, the reason he had reached out before his death. And I was ready to find it, no matter what it cost me. The next morning, I woke up with a strange calm in my chest. That quiet kind of stillness that comes after the storm, when there's nothing left to break. The letter, my brother's confession, David's words, they'd all rearranged the truth I'd lived with for 15 years. But even with everything I now knew, one question refused to leave me. Why now? Why had Michael written that letter after all those years? Why had he waited until he was gone to tell me the truth? I decided I needed to visit his house, not for closure, not even for curiosity. I needed to stand in the space where he'd lived, to see if the walls themselves could answer what his silence couldn't. His home was in the countryside, about 40 minutes outside the city. The drive there was surreal. The same highways we'd driven as kids, the same fields, the same old signs that had faded over the years. When I reached his gate, I hesitated. The place was quiet, grand, but empty. A large oak tree shaded the front lawn, and the gravel crunched beneath my shoes as I walked to the door. The housekeeper, an older woman named Ellen, opened it. Her eyes softened when I introduced myself. "You're Daniel," she said quietly. "He spoke of you often, especially these last few months." That stopped me cold. "He did?" She nodded. "Almost every evening. He'd sit by the fire, holding that letter of yours. He wrote it over and over, kept tearing it apart, rewriting it again. Said he couldn't leave without telling you the truth." Her words landed like a stone in my chest. "Was he sick?" I asked. She hesitated. "Yes. He had cancer. He didn't tell anyone until the end. He kept saying it was his punishment." I didn't know what to say. All the anger, the hate I'd built up over the years began to crumble into something unfamiliar. Grief. Not for what he'd done, but for what he'd become. Ellen led me into his study. It was a large room lined with bookshelves and old photos, our parents, the store, even a few of us as children. On his desk sat a small wooden box, sealed shut. "He wanted you to have that," Ellen said softly. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside were a few items: our mother's old sheet music, my father's pocket watch, and an envelope with my name on it. I opened it slowly. "Daniel, if you're reading this, you already know the truth. You know what I did. I can't undo any of it, but I can give you what I should have, the truth behind the lie. When I told Dad you had mixed up Mum's medication, I thought I was just shifting blame. I didn't realize what it would do to him, or to you. But what I never told anyone is that the medication I switched wasn't what killed her. She was already sick, far sicker than any of us knew. She'd hidden it from everyone. The confusion, the weakness, they weren't from the pills. They were from a tumor. I found her medical reports in her drawer after she passed. She'd known for months and made Dad promise to keep it secret. He told me only after she was gone. He didn't want you to suffer. That's why he changed the will, Daniel. Not because he stopped loving you, but because he didn't want you to feel tied to what was left behind. He thought cutting you free would protect you from everything that came after. I let him believe that lie because it served me. That's the sin I could never wash away." I stopped reading for a moment. My throat tightened, my pulse heavy in my ears. He hadn't just stolen from me. He'd carried the weight of that decision for years. My father had died believing he was protecting me, and my brother had died trying to undo the damage his own lies had caused. I kept reading. I tried to make it right, but I didn't know how. Every success I built was just a way to drown the guilt, the business, the house. None of it meant anything. You were the only thing that ever mattered, Daniel. I know it's too late for forgiveness, but if you can find it in your heart, bury me beside them. Not because I deserve it, but because they'd want us together again. Your brother, Michael." My hands were shaking as I folded the letter. For a long time, I just stood there, surrounded by the echoes of a life I'd once shared with him. On the wall behind his desk hung a photograph, one I'd never seen before. It was of us as boys, standing beside our parents in front of the store. My father's arm was around both of us, our mother smiling softly beside him. It was simple, ordinary, yet in that moment it felt sacred. Ellen spoke quietly from the doorway. "He never stopped loving you, you know. He just didn't know how to show it." I nodded slowly. Neither did I. 2 days later, I stood by 3 graves instead of 2. The sky was grey again, just like the day we'd buried our parents. I'd arranged for Michael to be buried beside them, not out of obligation, but out of understanding. As the last handful of dirt hit the coffin, I whispered, "You were right, Michael. It's too late for forgiveness, but not too late for peace." I stayed there until the sun dipped low, the wind brushing through the trees. In that silence, I felt something shift inside me, the weight I'd carried for 15 years finally lifting, replaced by something gentler. When I walked away from the cemetery, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The ghosts I'd carried were finally at rest. In the weeks that followed, I took over the old hardware store, not to rebuild what was lost, but to honor what my father had started. I changed the sign above the door. It no longer read M. Grant and Sons. Now it simply said, Grant Brothers Hardware. I wanted it that way, both our names side by side, not because we were perfect brothers, but because we were real ones, broken, flawed, and human. And every morning when I open the shop, sunlight spills across the counter, catching the edge of the old photograph I keep there, the one of all 4 of us. It reminds me that family isn't defined by inheritance or blood. It's defined by the stories we carry, the forgiveness we choose, and the truth we finally face. And sometimes when customers ask if I'm one of the Grants, I smile and say, Yes. One of two. The past doesn't vanish. It lingers quietly, like a melody you thought you'd forgotten, only to find it still humming softly in the background. But now it hums without bitterness, just memory. Because after all these years, I finally understand that forgiveness isn't about letting someone else off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of what they left behind. And as I lock up each evening and walk home under the fading light, I whisper the words I wish I'd said long ago. Rest easy, brother. We're home now.